This is a story that refuses to fade, a reminder that danger does not always reveal itself through obvious signs, but can wear a smile, shake your hand, and live quietly next door.
And in the quiet suburban neighborhoods outside Chicago during the 1970s, he appeared to be exactly that kind of man. Outgoing, dependable, even likable.
A successful contractor who built homes and fixed problems. A man who volunteered at community events, who attended political gatherings,
and who sometimes entertained children at parties, dressed as a clown named Pogo, a harmless character meant to bring laughter.
Yet that painted face would later become one of the most haunting symbols in American true crime history, because behind it lived a predator whose darkness was carefully hidden beneath layers of charm and normalcy.
Born in 1942, Gacy's early life appeared unremarkable on the surface, but beneath it lay a troubled upbringing.
A combination that many believe helped shape the person he would become, though no explanation can fully account for what happened later.
Because as he grew older, he learned not just how to function in society, but how to excel within it, building a reputation that would shield him from suspicion,
allowing him to move freely and operate without fear. His construction business thriving as he hired young men, often teenagers, to work for him,
giving him access to exactly the kind of victims he would eventually target. And it was within this carefully constructed life that the darkness began to emerge.
Quietly at first, almost invisibly, as young men and boys started to disappear. Some of them runaways, others simply lured by promises of work, money.
And what made his so dangerous was not just his violence, but his patience, his ability to manipulate, to gain trust before revealing his true intention.
Because once inside his home, the situation would shift into something far more sinister, as he would use handcuffs under the guise of a trick.
A method of control that turned curiosity into captivity, and from that moment, the victims were trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The brutality that followed was methodical, calculated, and horrifying. Yet outside those walls, life went on as usual.
Neighbors greeted him, business associates trusted him, and the community saw nothing out of the ordinary, even as the number of victims grew.
Their disappearances often dismissed or overlooked, especially because many of them lived on the margins of society. Their absence not immediately triggering alarm, a tragic reality that allowed to continue his crimes undetected for years.
Beneath his home, in the dark, suffocating crawl space, an elderly Caucasian man hid the evidence of his actions.
And over time, the stench of decay reportedly began to seep into the house, a warning sign that something was terribly wrong. Yet when questioned, he brushed it off as a plumbing issue. And people believed him, because he had given them no reason not to, because he had become someone they trusted, and that trust became his greatest weapon.
As the years passed, the gap between appearance and reality continued to grow, and the turning point came in 1978.
After telling his mother he was going to speak with a local contractor about a job opportunity, that person would later become a key figure in the investigation. And unlike previous cases, this disappearance triggered a more aggressive investigation, one that would begin to unravel the carefully maintained illusion.
As police questioned Gacy and noticed inconsistencies in his story, subtle at first, but enough to raise suspicion.
And soon, surveillance was placed on him, officers watching his movements, waiting for a mistake.
The pressure mounted as investigators dug into his past, uncovering a prior conviction for sexual assault,
making him one of the most notorious serial killers in the history of the United States. The investigation quickly drew national attention, a detail that shifted the entire perspective of the case, transforming Gacy from a cooperative citizen into a prime suspect. And as the investigation intensified, so did the tension, because he knew he was being watched, and yet he continued to maintain his composure.
Even inviting officers into his home at times, speaking with them casually, as if he had nothing to hide.
A psychological game that only added to the unease, until finally, the weight of evidence and scrutiny became too much.
And in a moment that would define the case, he began to confess, his words revealing a reality far darker than anyone had imagined, as he described his crimes with a disturbing level of detail, admitting to multiple murders and explaining how he had disposed of the bodies.
What followed was one of the most horrifying discoveries in American criminal history. As authorities searched his property
and uncovered human remains buried beneath his house, the crawl space transformed from a hidden secret into a scene of unimaginable horror,
confirming not just one or two murders, but dozens, ultimately linking him to the deaths of over 30 young men and boys.
The media coverage intense and relentless, as the public struggled to comprehend how someone so seemingly ordinary could commit such extraordinary evil.
The killer clown became a symbol, a haunting reminder that appearances can deceive, that the line between normalcy and monstrosity can be disturbingly thin. During his trial, his defense team argued that he was insane.
The defense suggested he lacked full control over his actions, while the prosecution argued a different perspective,
demonstrating that he knew exactly what he was doing and took steps to avoid being caught. And after weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury found him guilty, sentencing him to death in 1980, a verdict that brought a measure of justice but could never undo the damage he had caused. Even after his conviction,
he remained a figure of fascination and horror, giving interviews from prison, sometimes confessing, sometimes denying responsibility.
His shifting statements adding another layer of complexity to an already disturbing case, while the families of his victims were left to deal with the aftermath, the grief, the unanswered questions, and the painful reality of what had happened to their loved ones,
many of whom were identified only after extensive efforts, a process that took years and, in some cases, decades.
The house where the crimes took place was eventually demolished, an attempt to erase the physical reminder of what had happened there.
But the story could not be erased, because it had already become part of the national consciousness, a case studied by criminologists, psychologists, and investigators seeking to understand how such a thing could occur, how someone could live a double life so convincingly, how warning signs can be missed or ignored. This story is not just about fear, but about the lessons it leaves behind, about vigilance, about the importance of listening to instincts, about recognizing that danger does not always look dangerous.
And that sometimes, the most terrifying truths are the ones hidden in plain sight, behind friendly smiles.
Because in the end, this story is not just about what happened, but about how it went unnoticed for so long, how he navigated a world that never saw him coming, and how the mask he wore, both literal and figurative, his actions allowed him to become one of the most infamous figures in true crime history, a name that still sends a chill down the spine.
A reminder that even in the safest places, darkness can exist, waiting patiently, silently, until the moment it is finally revealed.